Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Packers Unscripted from Packers.com. I am Mike Spofford, joined, as always, by my partner in everything Packers, Wes Hodkowitz. We're coming to you here from our studio at Lambeau Field. And Wes, OTAs begin next week for the Green Bay Packers, and we will have access to some of the OTAs over the next couple weeks. Not all of them, but there will be a couple of open practices, which
Thank
means...
God, not all of them.
Yeah, thank goodness not all of them. We don't need to be there for all of these practices, but we will get to see a couple of practices. We'll get some locker room interviews, press conferences, all that fun stuff over the next couple weeks. So here's what I want to do. I want to sort of preview OTAs a little bit in terms of what we'll be watching for. What are we going to have our eyes on? And over these next couple of episodes, I thought we could split it up. We could preview the offensive side with regard to OTAs, and then on our next show, we'll do the defensive side. So offensively, heading into OTAs at this stage, what is sort of on your radar at the top of the list in terms of your observational priorities here?
There's only one thing I'm going to have my eyes on offensively throughout these OTAs, and it's going to be whoever, whatever, however they're lined up on the perimeter at receiver. We always talk about in the past, right? I mean, the OTAs is usually it's the skill position Olympics in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah.
It's the cornerbacks, it's the defensive backs, it's the receivers. I remember there was that one time, I want to say it was probably 12 years ago, where Mike McCarthy was even downscaling how many running drills they did during OTA team periods, because it was like, well, you couldn't thud up, you couldn't do all that type of stuff, so what's the point of even going through the motions, right? Let's get some passes out there.
Yeah.
But more than any other position, I think you're going to see a significant change at the wideout, because, with Romeo Doubs, that we all knew he was going to be moving on. I think everyone had a pretty good feeling for that, and kudos to him and congratulations to him for the contract that he got for the Patriots, and I think it's a really good addition for that offense. But the one that surprised all of us was the fact that Dontavian Wicks then got traded.
Right.
So that made it very clear what the Packers receiving core is going to look like, or at least who's standing atop that top three on the podium, with Christian Watson, Jaden Reed, who was recently extended, and then certainly Matthew Golden, the first-round pick from last year that everybody's expecting to take a massive step forward now, especially with more playing time in 2026. So just seeing what that trifecta looks like together is going to be one of the big things. And then also, how many reps does Sky Moore get? Where is Bo Melton playing? Is he going to be at receiver again? Is he going to be at defensive back? We're going to have to wait and see. And then Savion Williams, the third-round pick from last year.
That was the other one I was going to mention too, because to me, if we're talking, and we're going to be talking a lot about Matthew Golden, obviously, with the two veteran receivers you mentioned that are no longer here. But then Savion Williams being a second-year guy, just like Matthew Golden, and obviously a different body type, different skill set and whatnot. How does he get worked into the offense now with really a higher profile than he had as a rookie, and also hopefully he's healthy. Same thing for Golden, because both of those guys as rookies dealt with some injuries.
Yeah, and where does Savion line up, right? We saw him last year on the end arounds, sometimes taking direct snaps as a running back in the backfield and some of those two RB pony looks. But then, by the way, he showed downfield he can make some plays on the ball too. I mean, it had a really impressive catch radius and was responsible, despite his limited workload, for a couple of the Packers' best catches of the 2025 season. So, as much as these moves were made to clear the way for Matthew Golden and making your first-round pick and giving him as many opportunities as he needs to really showcase his talent, Savion Williams was a third-round pick last year. There would have been a lot of years, Mike, where that third-rounder might have been the Packers' first receiver that they took in the draft. That might have actually had a big role right away, like Romeo Doubs did as a fourth-rounder in 2022. So, but yeah, when you talk about Jordan Love developing that chemistry, and then also the Green Bay Packers having to find their offensive identity with these receivers. When, how many times I wrote about it in Inbox, but you've talked about it too. Romeo Doubs was the go-to target in third down situations and red zone situations. Who's going to pick up that mantle now? What is Jaden Reed going to look like now, coming back off of last year and unfortunately having the collarbone issue? But then being there for the stretch run and being able to get into an offseason relatively healthy. And honestly, Mike, I think the thing that we're all going to be talking about is, for as good as Christian Watson looked last year, coming off of the ACL, mid-season returning to form, my goodness, what that young man might do now entering this upcoming year with a full offseason preparation.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I think for all the talk about, exactly how this receiving depth chart lines up and whatnot, and I know Matt LaFleur is not worried about the depth chart in the traditional sense of things, but Christian Watson is the number one wide receiver on this team, not only because of what he's done and what he means to the offense and to Jordan Love, but as we've talked about so many times, he's the guy who changes how defenses line up and how defenses have to prepare, because he strikes fear into opponents, and that's not taking anything away from Matthew Golden or Jaden Reed, but when you can run in the 4.3s and you're 6'4" with the catch radius that Christian Watson has, that's a matchup problem, and that's where that's why he's the number one wide receiver is because of the attention defenses have to pay.
He kind of reminds me too of the Preston Smith of the offense too, right? Where Preston never wore a captain's letter here in Green Bay, but everybody knew he was one of the leaders of that unit. So,
absolutely.
Tucker Kraft, Josh Jacobs, Jordan Love, you have some guys with some really established credentials, some very talented dudes that are the heartbeat of this team. But Christian Watson's there too, and I think you saw that when he came back, as well as he played. Also, the uptick that brought the offense, that brought the locker room. It's cool when you see a guy come in as a rookie in 2022, and here we are 4 years later. I mean, he is unquestionably one of the big leaders on this football team.
Yeah, and sticking with the perimeter weapons for now, I think a couple of other things we will definitely have our eyes on. Number one, Marshawn Lloyd, and hopefully him getting off to just a good start this offseason, or continuing through this offseason, and then being able to get to training camp healthy, where then when the pads go on, you get in the preseason games, and then he can show what he's really about. And then with no Tucker Kraft at tight end for now, you talk about trying to get off to a good start here. I mean, I think Luke Musgrave is a guy that, a lot of people have their eyes on, because he's going to be important to this team whenever Tucker Kraft does come back. It doesn't mean that Luke Musgrave just gets pushed to the side, but, Musgrave, Josh Wiley, Messiah Swinson, does the undrafted rookie RJ Maryland start to make any noise here? So those perimeter weapon positions, not necessarily looking at where the top of the depth chart is, because we know where that is, but some guys I think the Packers are going to be counting on. You want to see them put a good foot forward this spring.
Yeah, and by the way, too, just one other thing to keep an eye on. When you look at the way this football team is orientated, I was thinking about this. How do you replicate Tucker Kraft in practices and training camp? Like, that's going to be interesting.
No
certainly there's going to be things tailored to Micah Parsons as well that only Micah Parsons is going to be able to do. But
right.
Tucker Kraft plays not only that position so much differently than the rest of that group. There's no one like him on the football team. I don't know if you saw that stat. I guess it was more of a chart on social media the last couple days, but showing like one of those like separations of all the tight ends of the National Football League, and just kind of throwing them in different quadrants for productivity and where they touch the ball. Tucker Kraft I think he was like maybe 3 or 4 yards out in his route when he was touching the ball, and just his yards overall compared to the rest of the National Football League. The guy's in a league of his own in that regard. But that's still being said, to your point about Musgrave and the rest of that group. It's going to be guys for opportunities for them to get chances. Packers are still going to be looking to identify an inline tight end, or if they're going to have to go with the 6 offensive linemen again like they did last year with Darian Kennard.
Sure.
Some questions there for Green Bay to answer. But certainly, I mean, that's going to be the conversation. Maybe not so much for OTAs and minicamp, but especially when we get to training camp. Because every single day when you and I walk out there doing that, checklist, taking attendance, and then just kind of waiting to see, hey, when is the day going to come? If it's in training camp, whenever it happens, or if it ends up being a PUP at the start of the season, that is going to be one of the big things that I think all of us are going to be tracking. Yeah,
well, OTAs will also give us our first look at Tyrod Taylor, the new number 2 quarterback, the 16-year veteran who has been brought in now to back up Jordan Love. And we'll see just how much, of the 11-on-11 he gets and whatnot with having recently arrived, and there's a lot to process. But by the same token, he's been there and done that when it comes to learning offenses and getting himself prepared. So I'll be curious just to see him for the first time.
Yeah, I don't know if you do this at all. I do this. This is one of the things I've started the last few years is when now that the Packers do sign free agents a little bit more frequently than when I first started covering the team, going back and watching the locker room interviews of these guys who are coming in, and my goodness, is Tyrod Taylor just an impressive human being. I mean, his resume speaks for itself. When you play 16 years in this league, I don't care if you're the first overall pick or a sixth rounder, 179 right in front of Caleb Schlauberhoff, like Taylor was in 2011. But just the way that he speaks, you can tell. And I thought it was such a great comment. I wrote the story last week, but that comment from Jason Vrabel about he is a leader of men. Like, this is a guy that was born to be a quarterback. And I'm just really excited and intrigued about the idea, too, of bringing in a guy that has that much experience, has played, what it'll end up being 9 more seasons in the NFL right now than Jordan Love, and what that perspective can do for Love. Jordan is who he is as a quarterback, and he's going to keep growing in terms of what he does, but having a resource like that during the week of preparation, in the meeting room, on the sideline, just having someone you can turn to. I mean, how often did we hear about Aaron Rodgers talking about what it meant to him to have a Matt Flynn that he could bounce ideas off of, Scott Tolzien, these guys that really become a sounding board for NFL starting quarterbacks. And Taylor also, pretty much every year of his career, has also started at least one game. So to have 62 starts under his belt and now bringing all that experience to Green Bay, now I talk about it all the time, man. You need a couple of those guys on your team. You needed a Mercedes Lewis at the turn of 2020 and 2021. I think Tyrod Taylor, we'll talk about it on the next show, but Javon Hargrave, these are the type of guys that when you have young dudes at 22, 23, 24 years old that are coming in your locker room, it doesn't matter about what position they play.
Sure.
That is an invaluable resource for those guys to be able to lean on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can't even think of the last time the Packers had a backup quarterback as that sounding board that you mentioned, who's got over 60 starts in the NFL. Crazy. I mean, I think that's going to be.
I think it literally goes back to like Jim McMahon.
Yeah.
For somebody that has that much of a pedigree and that much of credentials.
Yeah, it's going to be invaluable, I think, for Jordan Love as his arrow continues to point up. We'd be remiss if we didn't mention a couple things in the trenches. Even though there's no pads during OTAs, the pass blocking and the run blocking and whatever is not real blocking, because it's just not. But Jordan Morgan is taking over at left tackle, so that's something to keep an eye on. And then the other thing, we always look as reporters, we always look for the opportunities to get an idea of kind of what's going on with the depth chart, right? Yep. And the depth chart can always change. In OTAs, it can change day to day. In training camp, it can change day to day, and it means a lot more in training camp than it does right now. But assuming Zach Tom is not going to be at right tackle as he continues to recover from his off-season knee surgery, I'll be curious to see, okay, who's running with the ones at right tackle? Is it going to be Darian Kennard?
Yeah.
Is it going to be Travis Glover? Is there someone else who's in the mix there as the Packers figure out their depth at offensive tackle? That's definitely something to watch for as Zach Tom continues to heal.
Yeah, it's funny. The other 4 spots, it's all about guys settling in, right? I mean, Aaron Banks already is settled in, but I mean, Jordan Morgan, okay, you're the left tackle now, right? Sean Ryan, hey, you're the center now. Hey, Anthony Belton, who wasn't even playing right guard a year ago at this time, you're the right guard now.
Yeah.
Who's going to be that next man up? And honestly, the most proven depth in terms of the bodies really is on the interior. So it does go back to Darian Kennard. It goes back to Glover and some of these other guys that are going to be a part of that conversation. And it's going to be a massive opportunity, too, because we saw last year, Mike, the domino effect of losing Zach Tom and what that meant in the weekly preparation, and especially with what we saw on game day. There was always this hope, right? We saw him practice. He'd get some reps. Then we're kind of thinking coming out of that Denver game, okay, maybe Zach Tom's going to be okay. Maybe he'll be available for a playoff run. Ultimately, he wasn't. So now the Packers get a chance to look at the other side of that, because as much as we talk about it, and as much as the Packers value the versatility of offensive linemen, there's a reason why for many years the Packers had designated guys as, okay, well, if Corey Linsley isn't available, it's J.C. Treader. If J.C. Treader isn't available, it's Corey Linsley, right? Right tackle, it was Don Barclay behind Brian Bulaga. I mean, they knew who that next man up was going to be, and I think a byproduct of the Packers just having so many offensive linemen that they've added over the last few years, they haven't, through the draft mainly, there hasn't been like that designated guy other than maybe Morgan behind Rasheed Walker. So, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But certainly when we're talking, about the top 5 to 8 players on this football team, number 50 is one of those guys.
Yeah, well, another piece of big news in the NFL I want to get to here, but we do need to pay some bills. So very quickly, let's hear a word from our sponsor. SiriusXM NFL Radio delivers hard-hitting analysis and up-to-the-minute NFL news that true football fanatics need 24/7, 365. Welcome back to Packers Unscripted. Wes, big news here in the NFL. It's official. Aaron Rodgers is back with the Pittsburgh Steelers, is back with Mike McCarthy, and has announced officially that this is it, to use his words. 2026 will be the last season for the future first ballot Hall of Fame quarterback. Just your thoughts on how this happened, and in my opinion, how cool it is for the league that Aaron Rodgers and Mike McCarthy are going to be together for one more season. I think it's awesome.
I think it's awesome. I think it's great for the league. I think the way you saw them even schedule the team out the last 2 years, whether it was how they had made sure the Packers and Steelers were in prime time last year before we even knew if Aaron Rodgers
right.
was going to end up with Pittsburgh, but they're like, you know what? That's worth putting a chip on that one, right? Maybe it'll end up working out. To even this year, I think they're going to Ireland, right? And they have some other real big primetime games that are scheduled and international games. This is what the game's all about. And I don't know if you got a chance to see the board as far as how it looks right now for NFL quarterbacks and longevity, but Aaron Rodgers is on an island by himself now, especially since I'm pretty sure Phillip Rivers is finally retired. I mean, it's him, and then honestly it switches over to like Joe Flacco, Johnson, all these other guys that are in like that Matthew Stafford 2008, 2009, 2011 draft classes, and then it's Aaron Rodgers. I've reminded, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind.
Have not.
Great movie, by the way. 2004, okay. Focus Features, with Jim Carrey and Kate Winslet. And there's a line near the end of the movie of, "This is it, Joel. What are we going to do?" And he looks at her and he just says, "Enjoy it." And that's kind of where I'm at. 22 seasons. In some shape or form, Aaron Rodgers has been attached to the Green Bay Packers, whether he's playing here or not. And that's really my challenge for Packer fans out there. It was my kind of the point of what I wrote in Insider Inbox on Thursday, was that this is the guy that authored so many incredible stories that we're going to pass down to our children, our grandchildren. People are going to be talking about those moments in local bars and establishments and VFWs for the next 40, 50 years. And I wasn't around to see Bart Starr, right? But I got to hear my grandfather talk about him. And, there's so much passion, there's so much energy, there's so much emotion tied into the NFL in the present day. But if you can just take that out for a second, take out how things ended with Green Bay, take out how the reconciliation happened with Green Bay, and just appreciate that for a guy that you cheered on for so long, for a guy that you wore his number on your back, we all get a chance to watch him play some football every now and then in Pittsburgh this season. And I think that's special. And I was another conversation I had this morning on my way into work. I was talking to my buddy Scott about this. It didn't even compute in my head that Aaron Rodgers is going to be 43 years old this December.
Yeah, December he turns 43. Yeah,
how quickly it goes by.
That's the part that you have to take a step back a minute and process, because Matthew Stafford has put together a tremendous career, obviously with the Lions and the Rams, and it feels like he's been around forever.
Yeah.
Matthew Stafford was drafted 4 years after Aaron Rodgers. Now, Rodgers didn't become a starter until 2008, and then Stafford was drafted in 2009, and he was a starter right away as the number 1 overall pick for Detroit. But you think about that, and it's mind-boggling to a certain extent. I am glad that Aaron Rodgers' last NFL pass is not going to be the pick six at the end of the playoff game against Houston. I am hoping that playoff game against Houston is not his last playoff game. I would like to see Aaron Rodgers, with whatever the result ends up being, I would like to see Aaron Rodgers get another shot in the postseason with Mike McCarthy as his head coach and just see what happens. Now, just getting there from the AFC North when you've got Lamar Jackson and the Ravens and you've got Joe Burrow and the Bengals, and those guys are standing in your way just to get into the playoffs in the first
Not
place.
easy. Yep.
Let alone make any kind of noise. But yeah, it's. I'm glad he's not done yet, and I'm definitely going to try to set aside some time, and maybe we'll have more because of all these Thursday and Wednesday games and all this that you and I are going to be covering for the Packers. Maybe we'll actually have some more time on the weekends to watch Aaron Rodgers play for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and it's certainly something I look forward to.
And he touched on it in his press conference with the Pittsburgh media this week too, but the chance to go full circle now with Mike McCarthy I think is important, right? You talked about how you're happy that his NFL career doesn't end on a pick six. I'm happy that his run with Mike McCarthy doesn't just end how things ended in 2018.
Valid.
This is a chance to kind of bring those bridges back together. I think that mend has already happened, but for them to be apart it's crazy how quickly again this moves, Mike. For them to be apart for as long as they have been now. Mike ended up going and becoming the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys for 5 years. Aaron ended up obviously having the success that he did in Green Bay, 2 more MVP awards. Goes to New York, and now they come back together at this juncture of their careers. I think I would believe this would probably be Mike McCarthy's last job in the National Football League. For him to be able to start that with Aaron Rodgers, it just feels like the passing of the torch that needed to happen. And for Rodgers to extend that olive branch, I don't think he gets nearly enough credit. I think it'll come up in years to come. I don't think he gets nearly enough credit for the work he did with Jordan Love. Certainly Matt LaFleur, his coaches, they developed Love the quarterback, but to give Jordan that type of education and the way and his openness with him, that is a part of Aaron Rodgers' legacy too. So now he gets a chance to do that with those young QBs in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, they've got a couple of them. They've got both Will Howard and Drew Aller, the new draft pick from Penn State. I'm really curious to see just how Aaron Rodgers plays this year because, yes, he's a year older, but he's also just another full year removed from that Achilles injury. Now he obviously was much more mobile last season than he was his first year back from the Achilles. But you just, you wonder sometimes, in the age part of things that if you do put a little more distance between where you are and when that injury occurred, maybe he's going to be in even better shape, in better position physically than he was last year.
And he's going to have better resources too around him. I mean, with Michael Pittman out there, but then just look at the fact of the end of that season for Pittsburgh. It was great that they did make the playoffs, super dramatic ending to the regular season, right?
That was wild.
But that offense really sort of reminded me a lot of the 2015 Packers where so many guys were out. Marcus Valdes-Scantling gets signed off the street. He's turned into one of his main receivers. There was just so much that was kind of working against them at the end of that year. And Rodgers even talked about it. He had broken bones in his hand and his wrists, and he just had to keep plugging along. And that also it increases the risk factor for this season because there is no encore. I mean, there is no second act. I mean, Aaron Rodgers, every time he steps out there, this is it. So, it almost makes it feel like it's not just the playoffs where it's one and done. It's every single game this year is going to have huge implications for him and how this last stage of his career is going to play out.
Yeah, it's easy to forget, and I didn't even mention it because I didn't think of it in the moment, but the wrist injury that he dealt with last year and that he played through and whatnot, and he's now further removed from that. So and obviously just he'll have all the motivation in the world. He's decided, this is it. Okay, well, so here we go.
And I should also mention this too as we close out. It's not just Mike he's playing for either, right? He talked about James Campen is on that staff. It's these guys that he grew up with. Mark Lavatt, the strength and conditioning coach, who was here when he got to Green Bay in 2005. Grant Thorne is on that staff. Joe Witt is on the defensive side of the staff. Patrick Graham. Mike brought together a lot of his former coaches from different parts of his time in Green Bay, and Rodgers has a relationship with all of them. It'd be interesting to see this. This feels like the proper redux, right? It felt like the Jets one was sort of forced.
Yeah.
They're signing guys. They're doing all these type of things. Nathaniel Hackett comes in as the offensive coordinator. This one really feels like it's Mike McCarthy putting together his coaching tree back together, bringing the band back together, and now Aaron Rodgers being a part of that equation.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to watch. I think it's just another great storyline in what I think is going to be a season full of them all across the board in the NFL. But with that, we're going to call it a wrap on this edition of Packers Unscripted. Be sure to follow all of our coverage of the team on Packers.com. On our next show, early next week after the holiday, we will preview the defensive side of things for OTAs, and then maybe sometime next week, Wes and I will be out there watching a practice and getting some interviews and all that. So until then, for Wes, I am Mike. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. We will see you next time.